She turned the key from outside. The metal door groaned as it shut, its hinges screaming like the child inside. She turned the key slowly, too slowly for instinct, too quickly for guilt. Click. The sound wasn't loud, but it tore through the shelter like a verdict. The boy pounded on the inside, small fists thudding against steel, his voice, raw, fevered, desperate, echoed out into the hall behind her. "Mama!" Once, then again, and then silence. A soldier saw her. He stood frozen at the far end of the corridor, rifle slack in his hand, disbelief carved into his face. Another woman gasped, whispering something about monsters. Someone shouted, "She's lost her mind!" But the mother didn't flinch. Her hands trembled, but only after the door was locked. She turned, eyes hollow, and walked back down the corridor. The child's cries faded. Only her boots spoke now, tapping out a rhythm of retreat. She passed the soldier without a glance, past the nurse hunched over a stretcher, past the walls marked with names of the already dead. At the tunnel's end, she stopped, raised her hand to the stained concrete, and rested her forehead against the cold. No one followed her. No one dared to ask. You can hate her. I did, too. Even now, part of me still does. But before you turn away, before you call her a monster, let me tell you what came before. Before the screaming, before the door, before the world forgot her name, because she wasn't always like that. There was a garden once, a cracked clay pot with tomatoes growing against the side of a concrete house. There was a boy with soft lungs and a mother who counted his breaths every night. And there was a girl, someone else's child, who would one day remember a woman behind frosted glass. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back. Before the steel door, before the scream, before the choice no mother should ever have to make. Let me tell you the story of two children. Only one was hers. The other was crying alone. A garden, a radio, and worry. Before the war, before the bunkers and ration cards and smoke-thick skies, there was a garden. Not much of one. Just a crooked row of tomato plants lining the rusted fence behind her home. But to her, it was enough to keep her hands busy, her mind occupied, her hope alive. The boy liked to sit by the window and watch her work. He was always small for his age, pale, gentle, breathless when he ran. Most days, she'd carry him on her back while she watered the soil. She would whisper to the plants like they were part of him. "Grow," she'd say. "Grow like he can't." In the kitchen, a tin radio whispered updates no one took seriously. Reports from the border, talks of political tension, static-laced phrases like northern patrols rerouted and temporary closure of transport lines. But she didn't listen closely. Not really. Not until the static was replaced by silence. And then, something worse. The sirens came at dusk. She was slicing potatoes. The boy was napping with one hand curled into the folds of her sweater. The noise shattered the quiet like glass. Long, rising, repeating. It wasn't a test. She dropped the knife. It clattered on the tile. She didn't scream. She just moved. Within minutes, she had thrown what little they had into a torn canvas bag, his inhaler, a blanket, a faded picture of her mother, 3 cans of soup, 1 silver spoon. Then came the knock, not on her door, but her sense of safety. A man in the crowd snatched her bag from her hands outside the market. She screamed, but no one turned. Everyone was running. Everyone had someone to save. And that's when she saw the girl, barefoot, clutching a boy even smaller than herself. Eyes like mud after rain, empty, smeared, wide. No one stopped for them. The mother didn't either, not at first. She walked past, 2 steps, 3. Then she turned. She didn't ask the girl's name. She didn't ask where they came from. She just said, "Follow me," and the girl did. They slept that night in the basement beneath her home. All 4 of them. The girl curled protectively around her little brother. The mother curled protectively around her own. No one slept much. By morning, the streets were lined with broken glass and broken orders. The nurse from 2 doors down came by, arms full of gauze and instructions. "Leave now," she warned. "They're pulling back the checkpoints." And then, softer, "They won't come back." The young soldier knocked hours later, dusty and polite, asking if they had clean water. He looked barely old enough to shave. When he saw the 2 children, he paused. He looked at the mother like he wanted to ask a question, but didn't. That night, she tore the hem off her coat and stitched her son's name into the fabric. She braided the refugee girl's hair. She tucked her own fears into the corner of her pillow. She looked out the window and saw armored trucks. She held her son tighter. The world had tilted, and it would never be upright again. The first siren screamed at dusk. It began with the sound of boots, not outside the door, but inside the mind, a rhythm that didn't belong in the world she once knew. It beat against her chest as she packed 1 spoon, 1 pair of socks, 1 breath too many. She kept looking at her son. He was asleep again, his breathing thin, wheezy. She counted the seconds between each breath like they were the last ones. She didn't cry. There wasn't time for that anymore. They left before dawn. The nurse wrapped the children in layers of blankets, as if cloth alone could stop death. The soldier returned just before they stepped into the ash-colored morning. "I can walk with you for a while," he offered. He didn't say why. She didn't ask. Outside, the world had gone gray. Color had been drained from the houses, the sky, even the trees. Shops were gutted, street signs tilted like exhausted sentinels. They walked past a dog gnawing something that looked too much like a hand. She didn't shield her son's eyes. She just turned his face toward her shoulder. The group moved silently. The nurse led. The soldier stayed behind them. The refugee girl held her little brother like he might float away if she let go. They made it to the station by dusk. It used to be a place of arrivals. Now it was a place of endings. The tunnel entrance was blocked by sandbags and rusted fencing. Armed guards let people through one by one. There was no system, just faces and fear. The soldier showed his badge, his voice cracking as he begged them to let the group through. One guard looked at the children and sighed. "Just go. Don't stay near the front." And like that, they descended into the dark. The smell hit first. Mold, waste, old fire. Then the cold, thick and wet, like breathing through soaked cotton. The platform was already half filled. People lay in heaps, using bags as pillows, coats as blankets. Eyes stared but didn't blink. She found them a corner near the tunnel wall. Concrete above, steel beneath. No light but what flickered from makeshift oil lamps. She spread the last blanket. Her son curled into her lap. The girl and her brother clung to each other beside her. No one spoke. That night, someone cried until their voice gave out. That night, someone died quietly in their sleep. That night, the mother didn't sleep at all. She watched the walls for cracks. She watched her son for signs he might not wake. She watched the girl, who now slept with her eyes half open. And she listened to the silence, to the fear, to the distant thud of something collapsing above. It was only the beginning, and somehow she already knew they weren't going back. One night, 4 lives shared bread. The morning after they reached the tunnel, the rations were handed out like guilt, quietly, with lowered eyes. A man with a clipboard barked names. Another dragged crates behind him, leaving trails of crumbs for the desperate. 1 loaf per unit, no matter how many mouths. The mother received hers. It was stale. The edges were hard enough to bruise a lip, but she broke it gently. Half for her son, a quarter each for the refugee children, nothing for herself. She told them she wasn't hungry, but when she turned her face, her jaw clenched in rhythm with her stomach. That day, the nurse argued with the ration officer. "The child has a fever," she hissed, pointing toward the boy. "Half these kids have fevers," the man replied. "We're out of antibiotics. Complain to command." But there was no command anymore, only rules drawn in pencil and fear. Later, the young soldier returned. He'd found a cracked radio and was fiddling with it beside the tunnel tracks. The volume was low, but she could still make out words like "retreat ordered," "northern safe zones overrun," "civilian corridors denied." The soldier didn't say much, but when he looked at her, he didn't need to. They both knew no one was coming. Her son grew quieter. He coughed in his sleep, wet, racking sounds that made her fists clench. The nurse tried to help, soaking a cloth in boiled water, but it did little. The boy's skin was too hot, his lips too pale. She told herself it was just the cold, just nerves. But deep down, something else was forming. A crack in her soul, hairline, but growing. That night, a girl died. Not hers, someone else's. 6 years old, curled into herself. No one noticed until morning. The mother watched the girl's mother scream in silence. Not a sound left in her throat, just grief, the kind that made the walls tilt. Later, someone found a spare loaf where the girl had been. The tunnel erupted. Who took it? Who's hiding food? Who decides who gets to live? The nurse shouted. The soldier tried to calm them. The mother stayed quiet. She reached for the bread, held it, felt the weight of it in her palm. Her son was asleep beside her, skin burning through the blanket. The refugee boy watched with wide, shaking eyes. His sister didn't ask, she just looked. And the mother, she broke the loaf, gave the larger half to the refugee boy, then the smaller to his sister. She placed none at her son's lips, none in her own, just sat there, stone still, like a statue in the ruins of something holy. Later, she would whisper, "I hated myself for doing the right thing," because the right thing didn't save her son. The tunnel had no sky. They stopped counting days. Time didn't flow in the tunnel. It sat, stagnant and damp, like the condensation on the ceiling that never dried. No clocks, no sun, just the scrape of tin bowls on concrete and the sound of coughing behind every corner. The walls sweated, so did the people. They were breathing each other's breath now, sharing air like they used to share bread. The mother lay beside her son, his body curled into hers like a question with no answer. His skin burned. His sweat smelled like rust. When he stirred, he always whispered the same thing. Is it morning yet? She never told him the truth. The nurse had stopped talking. Her back had gone rigid. Her hands trembled when she tried to wrap bandages, but no one dared point it out. She was still the one they turned to. Even as she unraveled, she remained the thread holding the last rules together. She snapped at a woman who tried to hoard water, poured it out in front of her. "If we die," she said, "we'll die honest." No one applauded, but no one crossed her again. The soldier had changed too. He shaved his head with a broken razor, spent hours polishing his boots, even when there was no light to see them. Discipline was the only thing he had left. But behind the steel in his eyes, something flickered, a quiet kind of panic, like a man still holding a map in a world that no longer had roads. He stopped trying to fix the radio, stopped offering comfort. He sat near the tracks and stared toward the end of the tunnel where daylight used to live. The mother barely noticed. She no longer saw the others, only her son, only the rise and fall of his chest, now slower, shallower, like the last few pages of a book being turned by a tired hand. She gave him her soup every time, held the spoon until his lips moved, wiped his mouth when he couldn't do it himself. He didn't say much anymore, just gripped her fingers with his too thin hand. She told him stories about their garden, about tomatoes growing fat in the sun, about how proud he'd been the first time he picked one. She lied, told him spring was coming, told him they'd build a bigger garden with beans and basil and strawberries. He smiled, weakly, then closed his eyes again. One night, she tried to pray, not to anything in particular, just to the ceiling, to the cold, to the way things used to be. She asked nothing, offered nothing, just placed her head against the wall and whispered, "Please." The wall said nothing back, and somewhere else in the tunnel, a child cried, not hers, not anyone's, maybe, the kind of cry that no one moves toward anymore, because every cry meant someone else wouldn't make it. The tunnel didn't have a sky, only a ceiling that dripped when you were quiet enough to hear it, only darkness that learned your name. And in that dark, the mother knew, they were already forgetting who they were. Not dead, but not quite alive either. Survival wasn't what she thought it would be. It wasn't strong. It wasn't noble. It was silent. And it was cold. She fed him first, then lied. The bread was almost gone now, just crumbs at the bottom of a sack and 2 broken corners she'd hidden beneath her coat. She checked on them each night, guiltily, like someone guarding a secret, not because she was saving them for herself, but because she couldn't bear the moment they would be truly, completely out. She fed her son first, always, even when he stopped asking, even when he turned his head away, mouth too tired to chew. She tore the crust into smaller and smaller pieces, pressed them gently into his lips, whispering lullabies like spells. He tried to give them back once. "Give it to them," he rasped, pointing with a trembling finger toward the refugee boy, but she smiled, gently, falsely, and said, "There's more, don't worry." It was a lie, and she knew he knew. The girl, her name was Mira, she had finally said then, stayed close, always watching, always drawing. She had no pencils left, only a stub of charcoal she'd wrapped in twine and kept in her sleeve. She drew silently on the backs of ration papers, on discarded wrappers, on the crumbling edge of the shelter wall. Drawings of hands, of mothers holding children, of a son she hadn't seen in weeks. One night, she drew the mother, but only from behind. The scarf, the curve of the shoulders, A woman hunched over a child like a question mark. The mother saw it, didn't speak, only nodded once, and turned away. The nurse, now barely functioning, gave out what medicine remained. 1 bottle, 3 capsules. She crushed one between 2 spoons and offered it to the sickest child. Not the boy, another girl whose skin was already blue. That night, the girl died anyway. The mother said nothing. The nurse buried her face in her hands and didn't emerge for hours. The soldier came to her in the dark, not to comfort her, just to sit, just to breathe near someone who hadn't given up. They've stopped sending messages, he said. Everyone up top is either gone or burning. She didn't ask how he knew, didn't need to. It was in his eyes. That brittle edge, the unspoken collapse. Later, the mother whispered to her son, "We'll go soon." He blinked slowly, his skin pale and waxen under the lamplight. "You promise?" he murmured. She kissed his forehead. It was too warm, but she nodded anyway. "Yes," she said, "I promise." Another lie, another quiet mercy. Because what she didn't say, what she couldn't say, was this. He wouldn't make it to the stairs, wouldn't survive the climb, wouldn't last a day above ground. The tunnel was killing him slowly, but the world outside would devour him instantly. She pulled out the last piece of bread. It was dry and crumbled in her hands. She gave it to the refugee boy, said nothing, didn't even look at her own son. And that night, she wept for the first time, curled up in the dark, hand over her mouth, tears hot against her arm, because feeding him first no longer felt like enough. And lying to him, it was starting to feel like the only kindness she had left. A fever that would not break. His breathing turned jagged, not fast, not loud, just uneven, like a candle sputtering, uncertain if it should keep burning. She pressed her forehead to his. It felt like pressing her skin to a furnace. His eyes opened just a little, then closed again, too heavy to hold. The fever wasn't just clinging to him now. It was part of him, woven into the rhythm of his blood, the color of his lips, a slow undoing. She begged the nurse again. "He's worse." The nurse didn't look up from her folded hands. "There's nothing left," she said, not cruel, just hollow. She placed a cool rag on the boy's chest. It dried within minutes, evaporated like hope. Someone had stolen water again, or maybe it had just run out. The ration barrels were empty before noon. A fight broke out near the platform stairs. 2 men, 1 woman, shouts, a slap, a thud. The soldier intervened, not with authority, just force. He pinned one of them against the wall and yelled something unintelligible. When he turned around, his eyes were wet. "We're all animals now," someone muttered behind him. No one disagreed. That night, she watched Mira draw by lamplight. The refugee girl sat with her knees up, scribbling in her little sketchbook. 1 page was a loaf of bread being passed from one hand to another. Another was a girl lying beside a child, arms wrapped like wings. She didn't look up as the mother approached. "Do you think," the mother whispered, "your brother will live?" Mira didn't answer right away. Then, "I hope so." Her voice was small, unblinking. "But I don't ask anymore." The mother sat back down beside her son. His chest still rose, but more like a memory than emotion. She wiped the sweat from his neck, sang quietly into his ear, a lullaby she barely remembered. He stirred once, whispered a single word. "Garden." She tried to smile, tried not to cry, told him. We'll plant again when the sun comes back. Another lie, but it was all she had. Later that night, she found herself staring at the steel door at the end of the tunnel, the one marked with a red cross. Beyond it, the outside world. Beyond it, light, air, and 100 new ways to die. She thought about carrying him through it, about holding him in her arms and walking until she found someone, anyone. But she wouldn't. She knew. His body was too small, too weak, too far gone. The fever had already decided. It was just waiting to finish its work. She lay beside him, cheek against his shoulder, and whispered, "If love could save you, you'd never hurt again." But love wasn't medicine. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't enough. Not here. Not now. Not in the tunnel that forgot the sky. And she was beginning to forget who she was. Not a mother, not a woman, just a beating heart, counting down the breaths of the one it loved most. A blanket for a stranger's child. It happened quietly. No screams, no sudden alarms. Just the slow unraveling of another thread in a shelter already frayed to the edge. The refugee boy had begun to cough. Not like her son. His was sharper, more alive, but still a warning. Another child slipping toward the same dark shore. The girl, Mira, pressed her hand to his chest, said nothing, didn't need to. That night was colder than any before. The oil lamps burned out faster than usual. The steam from their mouths curled like smoke from a dying fire. She counted 3 blankets among them. One for her son, one shared by Mira and her brother, one folded and tucked under a woman who hadn't woken up for days. When the nurse confirmed she'd passed, someone took the blanket. That someone wasn't her, but the fight that followed made it feel like it had been. Accusations came in whispers first. She took it. No, the mother with the sick boy. She's always quiet. That's how they hide things. By morning, the blanket was passed to the front of the tunnel, offered up to avoid violence. But the damage was done. Eyes followed her now, not just with pity, with suspicion. That afternoon, Mira knelt beside her, held out the sketchbook, opened to a page with 2 children under a single blanket, one sleeping, one watching. The mother stared at it, then at Mira, then at the boy coughing beside her. She stood up, wordless, crossed the tunnel, unfolded her own son's blanket, and draped it gently over Mira's brother. She didn't meet the girl's eyes, didn't wait for thanks, just returned to her corner, sat on the cold floor, and held her son in silence, his skin now icy beneath his fever, his fingers unmoving. The soldier came by later, knelt down, looked at the boy, then at her. "Why?" he asked. She could have said, "Because he's stronger, because the others are watching, because there's no point in pretending anymore." But she didn't. She just said, "I don't know." And maybe that was the truest thing. Maybe survival didn't come from knowing, just from feeling too much and not enough at the same time. That night, she sat awake, her coat wrapped around her son like a poor apology. She could hear the other boys' breathing grow steadier under the warmth. She could hear her son's not change at all. Mira fell asleep with one hand holding the edge of the blanket, as if afraid it might be taken back. But it wouldn't. The choice had already been made. She whispered to her son, "You used to be so warm." And then she closed her eyes, held him tighter, and waited for dawn to come. But in the tunnel, there were no dawns, only decisions that turned into echoes and lived in the bones long after the warmth was gone. He won't make the climb. The guards came back just after the coughing stopped, just after her son finally fell into a breathless sleep that made her listen too long. Boots on steel, shouts down the tunnel, flashlights cutting through weeks of darkness. She thought it was a raid, that they'd come to drag everyone out, leave them to freeze on the surface. But then the soldier spoke quietly to the returning officer, a whispered exchange, a nod, a slip of paper. They weren't here to empty the shelter. They were here to give one last chance. One child, one adult. That's what the paper said. One set of names, one rescue pass. Final transport leaving from a checkpoint 4 kilometers north. Final window, 24 hours. The officer didn't say why this one pass remained, only that the others were gone. The road out was closing. Forever. The soldier didn't look at her when he handed it over. He just said, "It's real." She stared at the form in her hands. The stamped seal, the barcode, the hollow miracle. One child, one adult, but not her child. Not really. Not anymore. She turned her head slowly toward him. His chest barely lifted beneath her coat. His lips were gray, his hands too still. She whispered his name. He didn't respond. She lifted him gently, tried to imagine carrying him all the way to the checkpoint, tried to imagine him surviving the climb up the service tunnel, tried to imagine him walking into snowlight again. She couldn't, even in her dreams. He didn't walk anymore. Mira's brother still breathed easily, still coughed, but less, still had strength to cry, to sip water, to look at the world like he wanted to be in it. The mother looked at him now, not with resentment, not with hope, just with brutal, frozen clarity. Her fingers clutched the paper tighter. She stood, walked toward the steel ladder that led upward, just to look. The climb wasn't long, but it was steep, icy. Her son would never make it, not on her back, not in her arms, not on a stretcher. Even if she carried him to the top, he would die in the wind, before the truck, before the checkpoint, before safety. She sat on the first rung, put her forehead to the freezing pipe beside it, and for the first time in weeks, let herself feel everything. She remembered the garden, his tiny fingers digging into soil, his giggle when he found a worm, the first time he said mama with his whole face, the tomatoes, the sun, the cracked clay pot, all of it gone. And in her lap, a piece of paper, one chance, but not for him. She returned without speaking, laid the paper on her lap, stared at her son's face, traced the edge of his jaw with her thumb, then reached into her coat and pulled out her sewing needle. She began to stitch, not fabric, not names, but something else, a decision, something quiet, something final, something the world wouldn't understand. Because love wasn't enough to save him, but it might be enough to save someone else. She didn't sleep that night. She sat beside him, watching, not for breath this time, but for goodbye, the kind that doesn't come in words, only in pauses that stretch too long between heartbeats. She touched his hair, matted, damp, touched his hands, light as paper. He didn't stir, didn't flinch, just breathed, barely. She spoke quietly, not to wake him, but to keep herself from unraveling. "We had a tomato once. You hated the skin, remember?" Silence. "I peeled every one for a month after that. Still nothing." She swallowed hard. Outside the corner of the blanket, the refugee boy coughed once, then again. She looked at him, then at Mira, sleeping with her hands still on her brother's chest, as if holding him in place, as if letting go would break something permanent. She reached for the evacuation slip again, ran her thumb across the seal, smudged ink, faint government crest, official, real. She stared at the blank line meant for the child's name and began to write. Not her son's, not this time. Mira's brother, he still had a future. He could still run if he got the chance. She folded the paper into quarters, slipped it into the inner seam of the boy's coat, stitched tight, like it had always been there. No one saw, no one would. Then she returned to her corner, knelt beside her son, and tried to memorize the shape of him. The warmth, the weight, the quiet hum of him still existing in the world. She kissed his forehead once, then again, then pressed her lips to his ear and whispered, "I'm sorry." Not for leaving, not for staying, just for the world being what it was. The soldier came by again near dawn. He sat beside her, silent. Saw the past was gone. Didn't ask. Didn't need to. He just said, "There's snow on the stairs now. The wind's sharp. It's going to be harder." She nodded once, then stood, unwrapped her scarf, wrapped it around the refugee boy, checked the seam one last time, tight, hidden, unmistakable. Mira woke, looked at the mother, looked at her brother, then down at the scarf. She opened her mouth to speak, but the mother raised a single finger, not to hush, to say, "Let this be." The girl's eyes welled, but she said nothing, only nodded, once, gravely. The mother walked to the steel door, the same one she had stared at days ago. This time, she opened it. She turned back. Her son stirred faintly behind her, breath rattling. She whispered to him, "You'll be safe here, I promise." Another lie, the last one. She stepped through. The air was colder than she remembered. It smelled like rust, gunpowder, and frost. She pulled the handle closed. The hinges squealed. The latch clicked. And she turned the key from the outside. She tied the ticket in her sleeve. The steel key still trembled in her hand, not from cold, from the silence that followed, the kind that should have been filled by a child's cry, but wasn't. No pounding fists, no muffled scream, just stillness behind the door, and the sound of her own breath, shallow, jagged, louder than it should have been. The world on this side of the door was just as dead, only wider. The wind bit through her coat, even under layers. But she stood there, one hand on the door, the other on her heart. Behind her, the tunnel whispered with muffled life, whispers, footsteps, one echoing sob. But she didn't turn back. She descended into the lower corridor again, slowly, not into the shelter, not toward her son. That part of her, it had been sealed away. She walked toward the water station, the one that hadn't worked in days, sat beside it, stared at nothing. Mira found her first, carrying her brother, eyes red, arms tight. She said nothing, just waited, stood across from the woman who had made a choice no one could unmake. The soldier approached soon after, eyes lowered. He'd seen the closed door. He knew. "You gave it to them," he said. Not a question, not an accusation, a statement filled with something closer to awe than judgment. She nodded. Once. He didn't ask why. He just looked at the child, wrapped in her scarf, wearing the coat that once belonged to her son, then back at her, and nodded, as if to say, I wouldn't have done it, but also, I'm not brave enough to judge you. Later that night, the bombing began again. Distant at first, then closer, steel vibrating, dust falling like snow. The girl clutched her brother. The soldier grabbed his bag. And the mother, she didn't move. She sat in the same place, staring at the wall, as if she could still hear the rhythm of her son's breathing in the stone. The ground shook once, twice, then again, hard enough to knock over an oil lamp. Screams filled the tunnel, scrambling, boots, someone yelling. The roof! A piece of ceiling gave way near the entrance. Concrete, rebar, dust, blood. The mother didn't flinch. Someone shouted for her. The soldier tried to grab her arm. She pulled away. I locked it, she said, softly. I already locked it. He didn't argue. He just stood there, staring at a woman who had already said her goodbye. Later, when the smoke settled, when the cries turned to silence, when only a few had survived, Mira stood where the door had been, now a pile of crushed steel, rubble, and memories no one could retrieve. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just reached into her brother's coat, found the folded paper, now slightly torn. She held it to her chest and whispered, "She chose us." No one corrected her. No one claimed otherwise, because some truths are too quiet for the world to carry, but heavy enough to live forever inside a single child. The door closed with a soundless click. Time did not move the same way after the door. It stopped following hours or light. It stretched, collapsed, vanished altogether. She wandered beyond the tunnel, beyond the rail lines, into a world so wide it felt like drowning. Snow covered the ground like dust over forgotten graves. Ash mixed with frost. Boot prints vanished within minutes. Even memory struggled to hold shape. Her scarf was gone, her coat barely closed. She clutched nothing now, not even guilt, only numbness. For days, maybe longer, she walked to nowhere, away from everything, not searching, not fleeing, just moving. Once she found a broken signpost, Sector 6, evac zone closed. The letters had been burned, as if someone had tried to erase the idea of safety itself. She sat beside it and watched the sky darken. No planes, no stars, only smoke. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, just to stop seeing. She dreamed of the door, but not how it sounded, only how it felt. That moment when the key turned, and something inside her never turned back. In the dream, her son didn't scream. He just looked at her, not angry, not afraid, just waiting. And then he was gone, like breath on glass. She woke in the snow, skin raw, face wet, from tears, from wind. She didn't know. Her hands were cracked, her lips split, her feet bloodied inside her boots. But she stood again, because the world hadn't finished with her. Not yet. On the third day, or the fifth, she found the edge of a collapsed shelter, metal folded like paper, charcoal handprints on the wall, and just outside the ruins, a child. Alone, silent, covered in soot. He didn't speak, didn't cry, just looked at her with eyes that had seen too much, too soon. She didn't ask his name, didn't need to know. She knelt, unwrapped her coat, wrapped it around him. He didn't resist. He let her hold him. And in that moment, she felt her arms remember something. Something heavy, something fragile, something she had once lost, but not completely. She didn't call herself a mother. Not anymore. She didn't earn that word again. But she was something else now. A shell, a memory, a warmth that hadn't yet gone out. And that child, he didn't speak, didn't ask why she came, but he held her hand when they walked. And when they stopped to rest, he leaned his head against her shoulder without fear. That was enough. Ash fell like quiet judgment. It snowed ash the day the roof finally collapsed. Not heavy, not fast, just a gentle drift, soft and gray, settling over the remnants like it had been waiting. Mira sat beside what remained of the tunnel entrance. The steel door, now twisted and buried beneath concrete. No path back, no body found, only a single shoe, a torn sleeve, and the shape of a scarf half frozen in the rubble. She didn't cry. There was nothing left for crying. She held her brother's hand. He was sleeping, breathing, barely. The evacuation bus had taken them as far as a field station, one of the last before the roads dissolved. The pass had worked. She had lived. He had lived. And yet, the story refused to close. The nurse had made it out, too, burned on one side, limps when she walks. Her voice is rough now, more smoke than sound, but she found Mira and sat beside her. They didn't speak much. The nurse simply handed Mira a bundle, a letter, singed at the edges, nearly illegible, folded inside a scrap of wool from a boy's coat. No envelope, no address, just a child's name stitched faintly into the lining. And the words, "If you ever survive this, give this to her." Mira took the letter in silence. She knew. She had always known. Even when the paper had been sewn into her brother's coat, even when the scarf had been tied too tightly, as if to hold something more than warmth. She unfolded it carefully, read each line slowly, paused at the ones where ink had bled away. It wasn't long, it wasn't clean, but it was hers. That night, Mira opened her sketchbook. It was nearly full. Pages and pages of hands, faces, eyes, mothers, children, doors. She flipped to the final page, drew from memory. A woman behind glass, lips parted, eyes full of something that didn't fit into words. A hand pressed to the cold, not waving, not reaching, just there. She closed the book, placed the letter inside, tied it shut with a shoelace. Not for anyone else, not for the world, but because some memories were too sacred to be left unbound. Ash fell again that morning, but this time, it didn't sting. It floated. It shimmered in the pale light like snow that had forgotten how to forgive. Mira looked toward the horizon. The trucks were coming. Evacuees lined up in silence. She stayed behind. One moment longer, just long enough to whisper, "She wasn't mine, but I was hers." And that was enough. A girl draws a face from memory. Years passed, though no one counted them aloud. There were no calendars in the camps, just walls marked with fingernails and notebooks passed from hand to hand like relics. Mira grew up slowly. Then suddenly, one morning, she noticed she no longer flinched at thunder. She no longer slept with her shoes on. And her brother, now taller than her, no longer asked for stories before bed. But she kept the notebook, wrapped in fabric, buried deep in the lining of her satchel, beside a letter burned around the edges and held together with fragile creases. She had memorized every word. She didn't need to open it anymore. But still, on some nights, she did. Quietly, alone, she would read the final paragraph aloud like a prayer. Maybe no one will forgive me. Maybe you won't. But if you ever become a parent, you'll know. Sometimes, love means letting go. Love means turning away, so the other can survive. And every time she read it, she felt the same ache. Not guilt, not pity, but something deeper, something nameless. She didn't speak of the woman to many, only once, when asked to give testimony at a relief archive. The clerk had asked her name. Mira paused, then simply said, "I don't know," because the woman had never told her, because no one had ever written it down, because she was one of the many mothers who had died in silence, unregistered, uncelebrated, but unforgettable. Still, Mira drew her, again and again, on walls, on napkins, on the backs of ration forms. The same face, weathered, kind, distant, eyes that saw beyond the war, hands always open, a scarf that never quite stayed on straight. One afternoon, a volunteer found Mira sketching beside a shipping container. "Is that someone you lost?" she asked. Mira didn't look up, just kept shading the curve of a jawline. "No," she said, "I didn't lose her. She gave herself away." The woman blinked, didn't ask again. Years later, a child found Mira's sketchbook on a shelf in a rebuilt school. He opened to the last page, saw the image of a woman behind a glass wall. Lips parted, hand pressed to the frost, a soft scarf trailing in the wind. The boy asked, "Who's she?" The teacher answered, "No one knows. But some say she saved a child who wasn't hers." The boy closed the book, held it like something fragile, and whispered, "Then I'll remember her name anyway. Even if it wasn't written, even if no one ever spoke it the same way twice. Because some faces, drawn in ash and love, outlive even the war that tried to erase them. Some love has no words left." The field was quiet now. No sirens, no boots, just wind moving through dry grass and the occasional sound of a crow circling above the power lines. Mira sat with her brother beneath the shade of a husk-like tree. They were far from the tunnel, far from the snow and steel and silence that had shaped their early lives, but not far enough to forget. Her brother was drawing now, clumsy lines, uneven shading. He wasn't like her. He didn't need the past the same way, but still, on this day, he tried. He drew a woman in a coat too big for her frame, hand held out not in warning, not in command, just open, waiting, or maybe offering. It was hard to tell. He showed Mira. She smiled, then placed her hand gently over his. "Draw the eyes softer," she said. They were never angry. Later that evening, Mira took out the letter one final time. The edges were delicate now. It would not survive many more readings, so she didn't read it. She just looked at it. The words were still there. The confession, the love that had chosen someone else. She knew the world wouldn't forgive that mother, not in stories, not in textbooks. There would be no statue, no grave, just a memory kept in graphite and warmth. But Mira forgave her, not out of obligation, not because the mother had saved her, but because Mira had learned what love really was. Not rescue, not glory, but absence, willing absence, the choice to be forgotten. If forgetting meant a child could survive. She tucked the letter into the sketchbook, then pressed a dried leaf between the pages, a piece of the tree they now sat under, proof that something green had returned. She closed the book, stood, and walked toward the fence that lined the edge of the field. There, fluttering from the wire, was a handkerchief, old, faded, tied in a single knot, left by someone, found by no one, until now. She didn't untie it. She didn't take it. She just stood there and whispered, "If someone ever asks why you didn't choose your son, I'll tell them, you did. You chose to keep him warm, in the only way you could, by keeping someone else alive." Then she turned back to the boy, to the wind, to the sketches waiting in her lap, and in her heart, a whisper rose, not from guilt, not from grief, but from something quieter, deeper, something like peace. A voice, once lost, now barely audible. "I don't need to be forgiven. I just hope, in some dream, my child runs to me and says, 'You did the right thing.'" Ash still falls in some places. So does snow, but in the fields beyond the ruin, a tree still stands. And on one branch, tied carefully with shaking hands, a mother's scarf still flutters, faded, frayed, but never gone. If this story stayed with you, sit with it a little longer. You don't need to comment. You don't need to explain. But if you feel the weight of it, if it echoed somewhere quiet in you, consider subscribing. These aren't just stories. They're reminders that even in a broken world, a single act of love can survive longer than a name. And if you've ever had to let go of someone, we hope you find peace in that silence, too.